December 15th, 1944, 2 o'clock hours. A dimly lit command trailer near Luxembourg City. The air inside the trailer is thick, a suffocating cocktail of stale Chesterfield cigarette smoke, the metallic tang of a kerosene heater, and the cold, damp scent of wet wool coats. Outside, the Ardennes forest is screaming. A brutal winter wind howls through the pines, but inside the silence is even louder. General Omar Bradley, the soldier's general, leans over a sprawling topographical map. His eyes, weary and rimmed with red from days of little sleep, trace the thin blue lines of the Allied front. Across from him stands Dwight D. Eisenhower. Ike isn't the smiling politician general the public sees in newsreels tonight. He is a man carved from granite, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the edge of the plywood table. You can feel the vibration of distant artillery through the floorboards, a low, rhythmic thud that rattles the tin coffee mugs. Eisenhower points to a bulge in the line, a quiet sector held by exhausted divisions and green replacements. He's talking about a bold move, a shift in the grand strategy that would commit the last of their reserves to a gamble that could end the war or break their back. Bradley doesn't look up. He knows the math of war. He knows that every pencil mark Ike makes on that map represents 10,000 sons, brothers, and fathers who are currently shivering in foxholes, praying for a sunrise they might never see. "Ike," Bradley says, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that cuts through the hum of the heater. "You're looking at the terrain. You're looking at the logistics, but you're not looking at the men. If we push them into that gap, we're not just risking a breakthrough. We're risking a massacre. The tension in the room is a physical weight." Bradley's hand hovers over the Ardennes, specifically the thin ribbon of the Chez Eiffel. He sees the vulnerability that the Supreme Commander, blinded by the big picture, is momentarily overlooking. Bradley's next words would define the friction between the man who had to win the war and the man who had to lead the soldiers through the meat grinder. He looks Ike dead in the eye, the shadow of his helmet obscuring his expression. "If the Germans strike where I think they will, and we've moved those divisions, we won't be planning in advance. We'll be planning a funeral for the First Army." Ike pauses, his hand hovering over a set of orders that could change everything. The map looks like a masterpiece of strategy, but to Bradley, it looks like a trap. The silence that follows Bradley's warning is punctuated only by the scratching of a pencil against the map as acetate overlay. Eisenhower straightens his back, the leather of his flight jacket creaking. He respects Bradley more than any other commander in the European theater, but the pressure from Washington and London is a crushing vice. They want a decisive blow. They want the Rhine. "Brad," Eisenhower says, his voice deceptively calm, "weakened to win this war by sitting in the mud waiting for the weather to clear. If we don't seize the initiative now, the Germans will dictate the terms of the spring." Bradley shakes his head slowly. He moves around the table, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He points to a 60-mile stretch of the front, the Ardennes. It's a rugged, jagged landscape of deep ravines and dense timber, currently held by only 4 divisions. To any strategist, it's impenetrable in this weather. But Bradley has a sinking feeling in his gut that defies the intelligence reports sitting on his desk. "You're betting on the weather and the terrain to act as our flank," Bradley counters, his finger tapping the map with increasing intensity. "But I've spent the last 3 days looking at the faces of the boys in the 106th. They're green. Ike. They're sitting in those woods with frostbitten toes and wet socks, listening to the Germans moving heavy metal on the other side of the ridge. They can hear the panzers. Our intelligence says it's just defensive repositioning. I say it's a gathering storm. You can almost see the ghosts of 1940 hovering in the corners of the trailer. The last time a great power dismissed the Ardennes as impassable, the French army collapsed in 6 weeks. Bradley isn't just worried about a tactical setback. He's worried about a catastrophe that would reset the clock on the entire liberation of Europe. He leans in closer, the yellow light of the lamp casting long, distorted shadows across the map. If you pull the 7th Armored out of my sector to support this northern thrust, you're leaving a door wide open that we can't close. We re-gambling with a thin line that has already stretched to the snapping point. Eisenhower looks down at the map, then back at Bradley. The two men have been friends since West Point, but tonight, the stars on their shoulders feel like lead weights. Ike knows that in war, calculated risk is just a polite term for a gamble where the stakes are human lives. "I'm not asking for a gamble, Brad," Eisenhower insists. "I'm asking for a commitment to the plan. We have to keep the pressure on." Bradley lets out a long, weary breath. He knows the decision has already been made in the higher circles of SHAEF, but as a commander who carries a notebook filled with the names of his fallen officers, he can't let it go. "I'll follow the order, Ike," Bradley says, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But mark my words. We are inviting the devil into our house, and we haven't left anyone at the door to stop him." As Bradley speaks miles away, through the fog and the freezing sleet of the Ardennes, the first German Tiger tanks are beginning to roar to life, their engines a low growl that the Allied High Command has chosen to ignore. December 16, 1944, 5:30 hours. The Ardennes Forest. The world ends in a flash of white and a roar that shakes the very bedrock of Europe. While the ink is barely dry on the revised deployment orders in Bradley's headquarters, the quiet sector erupts. 2,000 German guns fire simultaneously, a rhythmic, soul-crushing barrage that turns the frozen forest into a splintering hellscape. This isn't the defensive repositioning the intelligence officers promised. This is the whacked M. Rhein Hitler's final, desperate roll of the dice. Back at his tactical command post, Bradley is jolted awake not by the sound, but by the frantic ringing of the field telephone. The reports coming in are fragmented, terrifying, and seemingly impossible. They're everywhere. The voices on the other end of the line crackle through the static. Tanks. King Tigers. They're walking right through the fog. Bradley stands before his map again, but the blue lines he spent the night debating are being erased in real time. The thin line he warned Eisenhower about hasn't just stretched. It has snapped. The 106th Division, the green troops he worried over, is being encircled. Communication lines are being cut by English-speaking German saboteurs in American uniforms. Panic, the great infectious killer of armies, is beginning to seep through the ranks. He looks at the map, his mind racing to calculate the distance to the Meuse River. He realizes with a sickening jolt that his prediction was too accurate. The gamble has failed, and the funeral for the First Army he spoke of is unfolding in the snow. "Get me Ike," Bradley barks to his signal officer. His voice is tight, stripped of its usual measured calm. "And tell him the devil didn't just knock." He kicked the door down. The atmosphere in the command center shifts from the cold precision of planning to the frantic energy of survival. Runners are sprinting through the mud. Officers are shouting over the din of telegraph keys. And Bradley stands at the center of the storm, his jaw set. He knows that the next 72 hours will determine if the Allied liberation of Europe ends here in a frozen ditch in Belgium. The pressure is no longer academic. It's visceral. Every minute Eisenhower waits to release the reserves, the very reserves they debated just hours ago, is a minute where more American boys are being overrun in their foxholes. Bradley grabs his coat, the weight of the stars on his shoulders feeling like anchors. "If we don't move the 10th Armored and the 101st now," he mutters to his chief of staff, "there won't be a front left to defend by Monday. The drive to Versailles is a gauntlet of chaos." Bradley's staff car navigates roads choked with retreating supply trucks, dazed stragglers, and the biting, relentless sleet that has grounded the Allied Air Force. The total air supremacy the Americans relied on has been neutralized by a ceiling of gray clouds. Without planes, the German panzers are ghosts in the mist, lethal, invisible, and fast. When Bradley finally strides into the war room at the Trianon Palace Hotel, the atmosphere is unrecognizable. The polished confidence of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, has evaporated, replaced by a frantic electric tension. Maps that yesterday showed a steady crawl toward Berlin now show a massive bleeding red wedge driving straight into the heart of the American line. Eisenhower is there, standing by a tall window, staring out at the rain. He turns as Bradley approaches. The two men share a look that bypasses all military protocol. It is the look of two men who realize they are standing on the edge of a precipice. "The 106th is gone, Ike," Bradley says, his voice flat, devoid of "I told you so" triumph. There is only the cold reality of loss. And the 28th is being cut to ribbons. We need the 101st and the 82nd Airborne. We need them in the center, and we need them there before the Germans hit the road hubs. But Eisenhower is hesitant. Releasing the Supreme Headquarters Reserve, the paratroopers, is a break glass in case of emergency move. If he commits them too early or in the wrong place, he has nothing left to stop a breakthrough toward the sea. "If I give you the Airborne now, Brad, and this is just a feint for a larger strike in the north." Eisenhower begins, his eyes darting back to the map. Bradley slams a hand onto the table, the sound echoing like a pistol shot in the ornate room. "It's not a feint. Look at the tonnage of armor they're throwing at us. This is Hitler's last stand. If we don't plug the hole at Bastogne and St. Vith, the Germans aren't just going to reach the Meuse, they're going to take Antwerp. They'll split the British and the Americans in two." You can see the sweat on the brows of the junior officers watching the giants clash. This is the moment where the soldier as general must convince the architect of victory to stop looking at the war as a series of supply lines and start looking at it as a street fight. Bradley leans in, his face inches from Eisenhower's. "Ike, you asked me for my counsel when you shaped this plan. I told you then we were inviting a massacre. That massacre is happening. Give me the reserves or start writing the letters to the families of every man in the Ardennes, because they are currently being hung out to dry." The room goes dead silent. The tick of a grandfather clock in the corner sounds like a sledgehammer. Eisenhower looks at the map, then at the man he has trusted since their days on the plains of Kansas. He picks up a red telephone. "Get me Bedell Smith," Eisenhower says, his voice steadying. "Tell him to jump the 101st. Destination, Bastogne." Bradley exhales, but there is no relief. He knows that sending the paratroopers is only the beginning. They are heading into a blizzard, without winter gear, into the path of the most powerful tank army the Third Reich has left. As Bradley turns to leave, his mind is already moving to the next nightmare. How to pivot an entire army 90 degrees in the middle of a snowstorm to hit the German flank. December 19th, 1944, 11 o'clock hours. A cold, drafty barracks in Verdun. The big three of the American command, Eisenhower, Bradley, and the volatile George S. Patton, sit around a scarred wooden table. The atmosphere is no longer one of debate. It is one of desperate, surgical calculation. The German bulge has swelled into a massive bruised lung on the map, threatening to breathe its last over the Allied supply lines. Eisenhower looks at the group, his face a mask of grim determination. "The situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster," he says, trying to inject a sense of offensive spirit into a room that smells of defeat. There will be only cheerful faces at this table. Bradley remains silent, his arms crossed. He knows that opportunity is a luxury bought with the blood of the men currently holding the frozen perimeter at Bastogne. He watches Patton, who is leaning back, a thick cigar clamped between his teeth. "George," Ike says, turning to Patton, "I want you to subvert your entire offensive in the south. I want you to turn the Third Army 90 degrees and counterattack the German flank. How soon can you start?" "As soon as you're through with me," Patton growls. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. a ripple of disbelief goes through the room. To move hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of tanks, and tons of supplies across icy roads in the middle of a battle shifting their direction of travel by 90 degrees is a logistical feat that should take weeks. Bradley looks at Patton, then back at the map. He realizes that this is the moment he warned Eisenhower about, the moment where the grand plan collapsed and left them scrambling for a miracle. He sees the risk. If Patton fails to break through to the 101st Airborne at Bastogne, those screaming eagles will be slaughtered, and the German spearhead will reach the Meuse. "It's a hell of a gamble, George," Bradley says softly. "It's the only gamble we've got left, Brad," Patton retorts. As the meeting breaks, Bradley walks Eisenhower to his car. The snow is falling harder now, thick flakes that stick to their wool overcoats. The bravado of the conference room fades, replaced by the crushing reality of the cold. "You were right, Brad," Eisenhower says, his voice low so the aides can't hear. "I looked at the maps. I should have looked at the men." Bradley doesn't take the win. There is no satisfaction in being right when the cost is measured in miles of white crosses. "We just have to hope the men hold long enough for the maps to matter again," he replies. As Eisenhower's car pulls away, Bradley stands in the slush, watching the taillights disappear into the fog. He knows the next few days will define his legacy. He isn't just a general anymore. He is a man trying to hold a crumbling wall together with nothing but grit and the thinning nerves of his soldiers. December 26, 1944, 1650 hours. Outside Bastogne, Belgium. The fog finally lifts, but the scene it reveals is a vision of the apocalypse. The Ardennes forest, once a place of serene beauty, has been chewed into a landscape of jagged stumps and blackened craters. Bradley stands by his command jeep, his binoculars pressed to his eyes. The air is so cold it burns his lungs, but for the first time in 10 days, the sun a pale, weak disk is visible through the haze. The soldier's general watches as the first tanks of Patton's 4th Armored Division finally punched through the German encirclement. The relief of Bastogne is no longer a theoretical hope on a map. It is a physical reality of steel and fire. But as the columns of wounded men begin to trickle out of the perimeter, ragged, frostbitten, and hollow-eyed, Bradley doesn't feel the rush of victory. He feels the weight of every word he spoke to Eisenhower back in that trailer. He thinks of the 106th, the division that was swallowed whole by the initial German surge. He thinks of the thousands of missing in action reports piling up on his desk. He remembers what he told Ike, "We are inviting the devil into our house." The devil had come, and though they were finally pushing him back, the house was in ruins. Bradley's chief of staff approaches him with a radiogram. Ike wants a sitrep, General. He's asking about the pursuit phase. Bradley takes the paper, but he doesn't read it. He looks out over the snow, stained crimson and black. He realizes that while Eisenhower had to think about the liberation of Europe, he, Bradley, had to be the conscience of the command. He had been the one to voice the uncomfortable truth that grand strategy is nothing without the endurance of the man in the foxhole. "Tell the Supreme Commander the line held," Bradley says, his voice thick with a mix of pride and exhaustion. "But tell him the price was exactly what I feared. The Battle of the Bulge would go down in history as the greatest American victory of the war, a testament to the grit of the individual GI. But for Omar Bradley, it remained a haunting reminder of the friction between the cold logic of high command and the warm blood of the soldiers who pay for its mistakes." He climbs into his jeep, the engine turning over with a reluctant groan. The war wasn't over. The Rhine was still ahead. But as they drove past the lines of frozen German dead and the charred husks of Panther tanks, Bradley knew that the balance between caution and realism, the balance he fought Eisenhower to maintain, was the only thing that had kept the thin line from snapping entirely. He had challenged the plan. He had predicted the disaster. And in the end, his refusal to stay silent had given the Allied forces the one thing they needed most when the storm broke: the truth.